Good afternoon. We are starting the topical session number 3, institutional success through dialogue. Am I heard? Everything is okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. So my name is Jaroslaw Duraj. As Vice Director of the Macau Ricci Institute, I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers and to chair this session today's afternoon. So we are going to listen to a presentation of Roderick O'Brien about the Red Cross in China, how and why. We are very grateful to Roderick for his participation in this symposium. He is very faithful, almost every year participates in our symposium. Thank you very much for your support. Roderick O'Brien is a adjunct research fellow of the University of South Australia. So over to you, Roderick, and the presentation is about the Red Cross in China, how and why. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaroslaw. I'm glad to be here. Already yesterday and today, I've been enlightened and challenged by presentations which are outside of my normal mode, but I'm always a pleasure to be part of the symposium. Now I will share my screen. Just hold a second and we are there. I'd like to say that I happen to be a very ordinary member, no official office of the Australian Red Cross Society, but the views I'm expressing are purely my own and without reference to any organization or anybody else's views. So my presentation is in 6 parts: framing a dialogue, the dialogue partners, who are the Red Cross movement in China, the agents of dialogue, a couple of examples, and opportunities, assessing, and conclusion. Framing the dialogue. In May 2019, China's leader Xi Jinping spoke at a conference on the dialogue of Asian civilizations. And he gave us 4 suggestions, 4 propositions for dialogue. First, mutual respect and equal treatment. Second, adhering to beauty. Third, adhering to openness, inclusiveness, and mutual learning. And fourth, keeping pace with the times and innovate and develop. I think I'd like to add a couple of those. A 5th one, to allow the dialogue to influence and change one's own position. And 6th, to develop mechanisms for times when dialogue fails. If we don't have the 5th, sometimes we are just talking at each other with monologues about our own position, and they become what you might call dialogues of the deaf. The 6th point is also important because failure is inevitable as well. So they're one way of framing the dialogue. Now, on one side is the Red Cross movement, and I've chosen to depict one partner in this dialogue as a movement, not as a state, not even as an organization. There are institutions within the Red Cross movement, but I want to speak of the progress of a movement, an idea, which has spread throughout the world. The Red Cross movement as an idea begins with the Battle of Solferino in 1859. The failure of the armies to care for their wounded horrified a Swiss banker, Henry Dunant. Dunant wrote a powerful book, A Memory of Solferino, which recommended 2 things: the organization of voluntary societies who would help the wounded, irrespective of their nationality. And second, and in an international agreement to protect the volunteers. And the book was an inspiring and set off an humanitarian project, which was later institutionalized into the various Red Cross structures. The movement has evolved since 1859, adopting a variety of structures and spreading globally. A key stage, which was led by a Swiss general, was the signing of the first Geneva Convention in 1864. And over the years, the Red Cross has developed a set of principles. These have changed over time, summarized today as impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and universality. This picture there is of the Geneva Convention, the conference for the Geneva Convention. And just a little picture because I like ships, but they are hospital ships. The older one on the left is from Australia, and the newer one on the right is from China. The Red Cross, of course, has become the marker for the official hospital ships. What about China? Well, those who are participating in the Symposium of the Macau Ricci Institute don't need an introduction to China, but it might be good to add one detail. Dr. Wei Bingling, a postdoctoral fellow at Tsinghua University, has suggested a four-part division for this, what becomes this dialogue. China in the late imperial period, in the Republican period, in the Maoist period, and in the post-Mao period. In the last years of the imperial regime, the traditional method for public assistance was through the local gentry. But a number of factors combined to make the message of the Red Cross movement attractive. One factor was the number of Chinese who'd come into contact with the movement and activities in Europe or in Japan. Another was the presence of foreigners like traders and missionaries in China who had experience of the Red Cross. And the third important factor at that time was the operation of the Japan Red Cross during the First Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, when Red Cross personnel, military personnel, treated the wounded of both sides. And so during the First Sino-Japanese War, foreign medical and missionary personnel, sometimes with local participants, had established informal Red Cross hospitals, suggesting to me that the principles of the movement, though not the organizational structures, already had a foothold in China. The people suggest 4 different dates for the establishment of the Red Cross Society of China, but I think those 4 dates actually just show how the principles came in preceding formal establishment. Important for us are people, and rather than just go along with a structural story, I'd like to present to you 2 people as agents of dialogue. The first of these is Shen Dunhe. He's pictured there on the right. On the left, by the way, is an epidemic, a hospital in time of epidemic. And so we can see how the Red Cross movement and its promoters in China were responsive to the, not just that, well, we have a pandemic at this time, but to the many epidemics which China has suffered. Let me give you a quote. Undoubtedly, the first memorable person is Shen Dunhe, the founding father of China's Red Cross movements. Judging from his photo, he looks like an old man. In fact, he lived only for 55 years. He was a returned student from Cambridge University, an official taking charge of fort dispatches during the First Sino-Japanese War, a specialist in international law, and a minister for foreign affairs. With so many titles, Shen Dunhe experienced so many vicissitudes in his life and seemed older than his real age. He was only 39 when he founded the Shanghai branch of the Cosmopolitan Red Cross Society in 1904. Cosmopolitan, the Chinese expression was Wanguo, and anyway, at that time he was in the blooming period of his life. However, his country was in a state of desolation. So some of the key people in that dialogue with China are those Chinese who studied abroad, engaged with ideas and movements which they brought back to China. Sun Dunhe is founding this Cosmopolitan Red Cross Society, and perhaps it was named there in Shanghai because many foreign nationals participated, but it later became the Great Qing Red Cross Society. Sun is noted for the foundation of hospitals, including academic hospitals. This is a picture of Sun in a formal uniform, and you can see just the reproduction is not very perfect, but you can see it's actually a Red Cross, that uniform that he is wearing. Let's move on to our second agent of dialogue, Robert Jacquinot de Bassange. And this is in 2017, a plaque to honor the Jesuit missionary, Robert Jacquinot de Bassange, was erected in Shanghai. Back in 1937, Jacquinot, already had an established reputation in relief work, and he led a group to establish a safe zone in the fighting in Shanghai, an area of Shanghai where no troops would go, and which sheltered at least 300,000 Chinese civilians during the suburban fighting in Shanghai. Jacquinot led the negotiations with Chinese and Japanese authorities to establish this zone located in the old city. And at that time, the zone was respected by both the warring parties and administered by an international committee. An interesting aspect of the diversity is that Jacquinot's assistant, Panda, was a member of the Chinese underground in Shanghai. Jacquinot had the principles of the movement in his mind. He was vice president of the Shanghai International Committee of the Red Cross of China and head of its refugee committee. The committee members wore the Red Cross emblem for their work. The boundaries of the safe zone were marked by Red Cross flags. And in fact, this idea was, safe zones may have been mentioned in discussions before, but there was at the time, no direct treaty law for the protection of civilians. It was simply the principled initiative of Jacquinot and his colleagues that was so effective. And the safety zone was a model for further zones in China. Perhaps more famously, another one in Nanjing sheltered maybe 250,000 people. These two agents of dialogue, Shen Dunhe and Robert Jacquinot de Bassange, I think are just simply representative of many other individuals who brought the spirit of the movement to China. They found in China a spirit that the spirit of humanity, Rundao, forged a ready link with the existing spirit of benevolence, Rundao, in the Confucian tradition. So, in fact, there becomes a link there. Well, one of the aspects of dialogue is an opportunity for mutual learning. And it seems to me that this opportunity has taken place in the area of international humanitarian law. And you can see a picture here of nurses with the protective emblem of the Red Cross, the protection coming from the Geneva Conventions. So one of the reviewers asked me to comment on the connection between the Red Cross in China and international humanitarian law. You see that original proposition by Henry Dunant was the formation of volunteer groups who could assist the war wounded. But you need then an international agreement of warring parties so that the volunteers and the wounded would be further protected from attack. And in a brief way, the second element, the international agreement, is the basis for modern international humanitarian law. And that's been a rolling feature as well. Participation in these treaties began in 1904 and 1906 with the Qing dynasty. The Republic of China acceded to the 1929 conventions, and further, the People's Republic of China acceding to the 1949 conventions and additional protocols. Since that time, there's been a major promoter of the movement has been the International Committee of the Red Cross, based in Geneva. And the International Committee has worked to facilitate the other part of the dialogue from China. And that's included the extensive promotion of international humanitarian law within the Chinese Red Cross Society and within the Chinese Armed Forces. Universities, that's been a part of our topic of conversation. Universities have also been involved in the promotion of international humanitarian law. And a number of universities have research centers. The participation has been two-way. Chinese judges have now served on international criminal tribunals applying international humanitarian law. Chinese received teachers of international law, humanitarian law from the outside, but also send. Senior Colonel He Xiaodong has been at the San Remo Institute of International Humanitarian Law, teaching for nearly 25 years. And various scholars and military people have been exploring the parallels between the Chinese ancient and modern philosophies and the spirit of the Red Cross movement. What about innovation, which was one of the elements mentioned at the beginning? Something that's new is the establishment of the International Academy of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Now, within the many, many structures of that carry the movement of the Red Cross ideals, all of the national societies have a little very big federation of their own, and that's the Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent now societies. At a couple in 2019, they came to an agreement with Suzhou University to host an academy. the Red Cross and Red Crescent International Federation had established a Solferino Academy in Europe a few years earlier, but this, I think, is the first one in partnership with a local university. Some of you who can read the small print will realize that the photo at the bottom of the page is actually from 2018, but I'm not very good with technology, and that was I couldn't fit on there the 2019 photos. I hope you don't mind. So let's go to assess the dialogue using those computers. First, mutual respect and equal treatment. Okay, it's difficult when we're not comparing two identical partners to a dialogue. On the one hand, we have a movement. On the other hand, a nation state and its peoples. But certainly China has grown in respect for the movement and its aims and sought to participate back into the structures and activities which have grown from the movement. I expect this dialogue and the activities of the movement to continue. Secondly, adhering to beauty. I'll take that in the widest sense, not just the art of Castiglione and many others, but the beauty of the humanitarian spirit, the beauty of the tradition of benevolence and compassion. They, to me, are at the heart of the beauty of life. Third, adhering to openness, inclusiveness, and mutual learning. On the China side, there's been a continuous learning about the works of the movement, particularly in the protection of victims of war, but also a Chinese emphasis, understandable perhaps, in the related health activities during peacetime. Okay, it wasn't only the Chinese who were suggesting that change or the addition to the original purposes of the movement, but that was a change in activities in Red Cross so that it included peacetime relief work. And China also began to reach outwards, moving through the Red Cross. The first step was in 1923, when, during the Japan earthquake, the then president, Dr. Niu, led the Chinese Red Cross with a medical team to aid the Japanese. It was the first of many steps of China taking abroad. There have been difficulties along the way. There were times when government institutions wanted to control what is especially meant to be a voluntary and independent movement. Let's say that that's an ongoing tension, an ongoing part of the dialogue along the way. Fourth, to keep pace with the times and innovate and develop. The International Academy of the Red Cross and Red Crescent would be one example of that. Something innovative and something new. And they've been allowing the dialogue to influence and change one's own position. Learning by the Red Cross movement has included learning to be sensitive to China's social systems and political systems. And also the Red Cross has set out to learn and discover elements in China's culture which happen to resonate with the culture of the movement. For China, the changes have included changing its legal system, incorporating training methods like mooting for law students. We saw a picture of that earlier, and the adoption through Red Cross hospitals of Western medical and nursing practices. The sixth one is perhaps the most difficult to assess, developing mechanisms for times when dialogues fails. But by taking a particularly long view, it is possible to see that, well, perhaps the mechanisms are not so clear, but they must be working because the survival of the Red Cross movement in China is something to be thankful for. By contrast, the local red swastika movement was prescribed by the post-1949 authorities. So dialogue has been maintained even during the very difficult period of the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, when the branch structure of the Red Cross Society of China almost disappeared. Patience must be one of the clear elements of the mechanisms, and also a clear perception of what's non-negotiable in your position. Okay, I know I'm close on my time. I'd like to conclude the brief overview of the dialogue and two quite different actors, but it's been a long term and it continues, and no doubt there'll be changes in the future. Thank you for your kind attention.